Hey guys, welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the results from the 2020 United States House elections, as well as the races for the United States Senate, and talk about how and why Democrats heavily underperformed what they were able to accomplish at the presidential level, and how down ballot the Republicans had a very strong election. And if you could even call it, you had a little bit of a Republican ripple, where you saw Republican make key gains and abstain from losing a lot of these seats that they were expected to lose. So we're going to take a look at all that and more, and take a look at the races that really made the Republicans have a very good results in these congressional down ballot races, and ask a question: why were the Republicans why were they able to? So before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. We have a lot of new exciting content on the way. So let's get started. So to begin this video, we're going to start by talking about this map right here. So we have the 2020 House election results map. So let's take a look at 6 seats that have been called already in the United States House. We have, at this point in time, 3 seats the Democrats were able to flip in North Carolina. They have 2 of those seats, and down in the state of Georgia, they have 1 seat, Carolyn Bordeaux. Generally speaking, these are seats and areas of these states that have Democratic instincts. And in Georgia, we have the example of how the suburbs started to flip, where now, that race, it becomes abundantly clear that, the Democrats were getting forced in that state. And I think throughout this election season, we've been able to see that. And generally speaking, when it comes to Georgia, for example, we saw how the Democrats were making gains. Now, what I think is more appalling and more interesting to see is how in a lot of these districts where you had semi-popular incumbents, pretty notable figures of the Democratic Party, in some cases, at this point, they lost their seats. Take a look at Florida, for example. And there's many different things that come into that. We have the 2 South Florida districts, which are some of the most notable ones. We have Debbie Merksel-Powell and Donna Shalala, who lost their re-election bids. Both these senators were newly elected in 2018. And again, in certain parts of the country, like especially in Florida, in Iowa, and we saw that similar effect in Minnesota, as a whole, we saw the impact of the whole Democratic Party moving further to the left. And although AOC may not be at the top of the ticket, although Ilhan Omar might not be at the top of the ticket, they're gaining power in the party, and they're bringing the establishment to the left, which for certain groups of voters, in this case, voters in South Florida, voters in Iowa, where Abby Finkenauer lost to Ashley Hinson by a pretty notable margin. Currently, we have another race in Iowa, a pretty Democratic district. Now the difference is only less than 40 votes. This is completely absurd. For some of these races, New Mexico, the Democrats were making very big gains. And for example, Torres Esmol, she lost her seat to Harrell. And there's a lot of these seats that the Democrats were expected to hold on, and they were expected to make bigger gains. And I think, generally speaking, what really hurt the Democrats was that very big they had a misconception in a way, where they had contradictory messages when it came of who they were appealing to and in what way, because the Democratic Party of the Bronx, in this case the AOC's Democratic Party, is not going to be the same Democratic Party from Virginia. We had, for example, Abigail Spanberger talk about how she almost lost her House seat, and she was caught on tape. She almost lost her House seat because of initiatives that were being pushed by the more liberal members of Congress. And of course, those members have a right to support whatever they want. But if you think about it, as a Democratic Party, it really brings them down in many different ways. And if you take a look at the flip seats, it's almost a lot of red on this map. You see, for example, and you had a lot of strong women running. I think that's another thing that really helped the Republicans. They had amazing candidate choices. And in some cases, for example, Michelle Fishbach blew Colin Peterson out of the park. In South Florida, 2 Hispanics that could appeal to that base of voters that really were enthusiastic about the president, who in this case In South Florida, at least, you saw a very big gain of support for the president with over 23 points, if you county by county. In Michigan, this is a more Republican-leaning district. This district was Justin Amash's district, so it was a libertarian House seat. However, that ended up flipping. In California, we still have some races outlined. So if we zoom into the Orange County part of California, we have this race with Valda against T.J. Cox, still to be called. It's close, but at this point, it's looking like Valda is going to win. If you take a look at Michelle Steele, she won that race there, beating Ruda. If you see Young King beating Hill Cisneros, that's a big race. And generally speaking, again, it's because they had very strong candidate choices. A lot of those people who lost races in 2018 came back for a second shot. I mean, I would say most notably Maria Elvira Salazar down in Florida against Debbie Mercosal Powell. And generally speaking, we see that they had very strong candidate choices, and that's what propelled them to a victory. We have some races still in called, for example, up in New York, Claudia Tenney going against Anthony Brindisi. We still have that race to be called. And there is still a lot of races to be called. And we're seeing the Republicans have very, very, very big gains. You had in the state of Oklahoma, Stephanie Bice. She won that district that was held by Kendra Horn. And again, it just comes down to the Republicans having good candidate choices. The forecast and the polls put the Republicans completely they probably won't even gain seats, but they ended up gaining a lot. And I mean, this election was an embarrassment down ballot for the Democrats. If this tells us anything, is the reason why the Republicans didn't win the presidency is because they had Trump on their side. And let me tell you, a lot of these House seats, they didn't flip because of Trump. They flipped because, they just don't like how the Democratic Party is going. So, current message in the party is, we don't like either. We don't like the Democrats being far left, and they don't like Donald Trump being sometimes divisive. And if Donald Trump was on the ticket and he had a more traditional Republican, like Mike Pence on the ticket, at top of the ticket at least, I think we could have seen the Republicans take the presidency. And again, we're seeing a similar effect when it comes to the United States Senate. And again, the Senate was the thing that, or a situation where you were looking at, and the Democrats were extremely optimistic that they're going to win. Is it completely over? Well, no. They have to win both races in Georgia, which at this point it's a little bit of a far-fetched scenario, just basing it off of the current results that we have. And plus, it would be a very slim majority with Kamala Harris breaking the tie as vice president. But again, this also comes to show these races were an embarrassment. Take a look at North Carolina. I guess Cunningham had a scandal at the end, which really hurt him, for example. But Tom Tillis beat him by around a point, which or almost a point and a half. Very strong numbers. 1.8% is the difference. And in a lot of these places, pretty embarrassing races for the Democrats. Steve Daines beat Steve Bullock by 10%. This was a race the Democrats were very optimistic. They thought Steve Bullock is a great candidate. And a lot of people were thinking, and even some of the forecasters, like FiveThirtyEight, they were putting Steve Bullock ahead. In Iowa, Teresa Greenfield, she definitely underperformed expectations. Joni Ernst beat her by over 5 points, almost 6, nearing 7 points. So I think, generally speaking, we see how in these Senate races, the Democrats heavily underperformed. And even in Georgia, these races actually ended up being a lot closer than a lot of people thought. In the normal election, it was a difference of around 2 points. And in the special, it was, again, a bigger field, I guess, once you think about it and take it into but if you have, for example, Collins and Loeffler's votes, and you compare that to Warnock, they beat handily Raphael Warnock. What happens in those Senate races are going to have a very big impact on the whole Senate election as a whole. And I would say the most surprising election result from this election, that really was surprising for a good way for the Republicans, is the way that Suzanne Collins was able to cling on to her seat. This was a very bad fall for Sarah Gideon. Sarah Gideon had all the momentum. She was running against the most unpopular senator on Capitol Hill, in their constituencies. Yet she was not able to pull off this race, even though she was put ahead by the polls, even though the forecasters thought that she was going to win. And again, this comes to show another thing: the polls, the forecasts, all these different media sources that were inputting election information, they ended up being wrong massively. Some of these races, they got them off by 7 points. I mean, especially at the presidential level. If you take a look at Michigan, for example, this race was insanely close. I mean, the difference was only 1.7%. Minnesota ended up being at 5 points. A lot of people thought this race was safe. Take a look at Arizona. This race was looking like Mark Kelly's probably going to win by 5 points. He was close. He was at 4.8. And I think this is the most shocking race. A lot of people thought New Mexico, wow, it's going to be a blowout for the Democrats. Ben Ray Lujan. It ended up being only 5 points. And we're almost to the point where, I mean, they're winning by a lesser margin in places like New Mexico than they were in Colorado. I mean, Colorado is a great example of how they were able to overperform. But generally speaking, the Democratic Party had a very bad year when it comes to down-ballot races. And again, it puts into question, how are they going to get to that Senate majority? A Senate majority isn't looking that likely for the Democrats in 2022. The map has some places where they can pick up seats. They could probably get, I think, a 50-50 majority at best. Actually, well, maybe a little bit more. But the path for a clear path for a Senate majority for the Democrats is not there. And I think it becomes apparent that in a lot of these states, they're just trending more Republican. And if the Democrats continue going in the hole of the socialist, quote unquote, and I think some of those ideas just end up being socialist if you look at the textbook definition, like the AOC and Bernie Sanders policies, they're going to dig themselves into a hole and they're going to start losing the suburbs. In these cases, we're seeing, especially not in the Senate, but in the House, you can clearly see big suburbs of Republican cities that started to flip. Those are going back because those ideas are going way too far to the left. And now I think it also comes into question, should there be new leadership in Washington for the Democrats? Nancy Pelosi's been there for years. Chuck Schumer's been there by a little bit. No, he's not been that long. It's only been like 6 years. Still, it's been quite a while. I think there should be some new leadership for the Democrats. And I think they should make that leadership conservative because, remember, the U.S. is a conservative country. The Democrats were able to win these races because they had good conservative candidates in conservative districts. However, as soon as you start punching an AOC sticker on the top of the party's kind of image, it's going to be hard to win those districts. Down in Texas, those districts in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger held on narrowly. In Georgia, in North Carolina, it's going to become more and more hard. And at the end of the day, it's something that truly the Democrats are going to have to fight for. And they're going to have to make that decision. Stay to the more conservative side and hope to have some leverage of what we can do, some leverage of how we can work, some leverage on what we can run our administration like. Or do you want to move far left, try to squeeze through ideas with a Republican Senate? You know, it's going to be something that's going to be hard for the Democrats. And if the Republicans have the Senate, it's going to make it 10 times harder because who has the power in Washington? It's not the president and it's not the House. And well, it's two people, the Senate and the Supreme Court. Those two are the most powerful institutions in the United States. Senate is the more important branch of Congress. And if the Republicans are continuing to grasp on the Senate like they have now, they're going to be doing great. And I think for the Democrats, if they don't shy away from those liberal, super liberal socialist ideas that are being presented to voters in these conservative districts, they might be in for a rude awakening when they start losing seats in the House to a point they might lose their majority in 2022. And that Senate majority is going to, the gap and the deficit of seats is going to rather increase. So that's what we're currently seeing. And I think for the Democrats, this congressional elections was truly one of the biggest embarrassments in recent political history. And I mean, comparatively, they did pretty well in the presidency. Yet some of those states they didn't transfer on. And I think that's something that just ended up being harder for them. And in races, they invested a lot of money in and a lot of resources in. They essentially didn't perform as well. Take a look at Maine. Take a look at Montana. Take a look at Iowa. in part because of how the Democratic Party was branded as a socialist party. And essentially, I think that's true. That AOC, Ilhan Omar, all those big, more leftist Democrats are gaining power in the political mainstream. And as long as that happens, we're going to start to see a divide within the Democratic Party if we don't see it right now. I think we are. Where we're going to see, for example, in the House, a faction of the liberal progressives, of the establishment Nancy Pelosi type, and more conservative suburban Democrats. That is going to be the divide we're seeing, and it's going to be crucial to see because that's going to affect how strong their majority is going to be and how they can organize it. Because if they have this big division, if they have all these divisions, it's going to be hard to control majority. It's going to be hard to move a majority to vote on the initiatives they want to control. I mean, I think at this point in time, it just shows the Democratic Party is fractioned. Within the next years, they're going to have to decide what path are they going to take. And simply, that's what we have for this video. So guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.